Behold my stuff.
Hello, my name is Andy, and this is going to be a video introducing one of my favorite decks, and probably one of my most powerful, Marath Will of the Wild. Now, the purpose of this video is to introduce my deck, explain some of the key cards, how they work, and some of the more interesting interactions, and to kind of clue you in on some of my card choices and the direction I chose to go with this deck. This video hopefully will be helpful for beginners or people that are less familiar with Commander, and maybe even for more entrenched players that are just, interested in learning about Marath Will of the Wild. Marath is an elemental deck in the Naya colors, and it's quite strong. I normally don't play infinite combos. I have only maybe 2 decks out of my 20 odd that do go infinite, and I would never play this deck at a table with more casual players or people that prefer to play with lower power. It can go off the rails as far as the things it can do, and it is able to win quite quickly and in very dramatic fashion. The deck list for this is on Tapped Out, and I'm not going to go through the entire deck, but I will kind of highlight some. Here is the entire deck list here, and if you want to check it out, it's my username is J Sanchez. It was an account created quite a few years ago when I was going through a mighty big Rick and Morty phase. Still love Rick and Morty, but yeah, it kind of dominated the way I presented my decks back in 2017. So let's take a look at the card. Marath is Naya colors, and it costs red, green, white to cast. It comes into play with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the amount of mana that was spent to cast it. So you cast it for 3, you get 3 counters. It goes back to the command zone, you cast it for 5, it comes in with 5 counters, 7, 9, all the way up. And this, the way it scales as the game goes later, or if it gets killed, it is very powerful. The fact that it's not locked into 3 all the time definitely makes a bit of a difference when you're playing with, especially when the games go a bit longer, or when people spot her as a threat. And yeah, you're not losing out too much by having to recast. A lot of times you're actually happy to let her die, so you can then recast her and get access to it with more counters. Its ability is pay X and remove X +1/+1 counters from it. And you can choose to put X +1/+1 counters on target creature, or it deals X damage to target creature or player. That wording has been changed to any target. And you can put X green elemental creature tokens onto the battlefield. Or put an XX, green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. Now that X has been errated. It's been changed to, you can't set X at 0. It's because being able to make infinite 0/0 creatures that would come into play and then immediately die would interact with cards like Blood Artist, or anything that triggers off creatures coming in, or creatures leaving play, or creatures dying. So you can't set X for 0, but it doesn't really hamper the deck too much. I've built Marath to basically be a combo deck. It doesn't have to win with combos. It will do a lot of different things, but it is able to combo, and there are quite a lot of support pieces for the combo. So let's see how the combos work. So Marath's ability to pay X and remove X counters and then put counters somewhere else is kind of at the heart of it being able to combo out. You can pay 1 to remove a counter from Marath to put a counter back on it, which normally wouldn't do anything unless you have cards that increase the number of counters that you place on things. So Conclave Mentor and Hardened Scales do basically the exact same thing. If 1 or more +1/+1 counters will be put on a creature you control, that many +1 counters are put on that creature instead. So you pay 1, remove a counter from Marath to put a counter back on it, but instead of putting 1 on it, you put 2. So you net 1 counter. So basically by paying 1, you can put an extra counter on Marath. Unbound Flourishing has very different text. The first ability, whenever you cast a permanent spell with mana cost that contains X, double the value of X, is not what we're looking at here. What we're looking at is its second ability. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell or activate an ability, if that spell's mana cost or that ability's activation cost contains X, copy that spell or ability. You may choose new targets for the copy. So Marath's ability is an activated ability. So you pay 1 to remove a counter and put the counter back on Marath, and Unbound Flourishing copies it, putting 2 counters on. Basically doing the same thing in this particular situation as Conclave Mentor and Hardened Scales. Doubling Season just doubles the number of counters, which again, in this particular situation, 1 times 2 is 2, so you're just basically adding 1 more. But Unbound Flourishing and Doubling Season help when you're creating tokens with Marath. So pay 1 to remove a counter from Marath to make an elemental. You make 2 with Unbound Flourishing. Same thing with Doubling Season. So Hardened Scales, Conclave Mentor are the cheapest ones, but they have less versatility when you're trying to do bigger things like make tokens. Unbound Flourishing also doubles damage, which doesn't come up too often, but it absolutely can if you need to kill a particularly big planeswalker or burn out a creature or just go straight to a player's face. One card that kind of screamed out to me as a combo piece was Cryptic Trilobite. So Cryptic Trilobite is an XX Trilobite. I don't know if there's many creatures with that type. And it enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters. So you pay 2 and it comes in with 1 counter. Pay 4, it comes in with 2 counters. And you can remove a +1/+1 counter from Cryptic Trilobite and add double colorless. Spend this mana only to activate abilities, which is kind of perfect with Marath because that's what you want to do with it. You want to activate abilities. So let's say Marath Will of the Wild has 3 counters on it, and you have mana open, and you have Hardened Scales and Cryptic Trilobite in play. You can pay 1 to remove a counter from Marath Will of the Wild to put a counter on Cryptic Trilobite. So Cryptic Trilobite gets 2 counters. You then remove 1 counter from Cryptic Trilobite to make double colorless, and you use that mana on Marath to remove a counter, and then put 2 counters back on Marath, remove a counter, put 2 counters back on it. So now Marath has more counters, and Cryptic Trilobite has the same number. It has +1 counter. So you can just go through that loop to put, an infinite number of counters on Marath, make it infinitely big, make an infinitely big Cryptic Trilobite if you wanted. But in this particular situation, what you'll probably do is then just deal infinite damage, just by going through the loop, getting enough counters on Marath and Trilobite to where you can just start removing counters from Marath to deal damage wherever you choose. And that interaction with Cryptic Trilobite works with any one of these 4. So if you can get these 3 cards, replace Hardened Scales with one of the other 3, you are just going to win the game straight out, unless someone has a kill spell with Split Second. That means you can't respond, or some way of protecting themselves. But just the way Marath works is you can keep activating the ability again and again and again. So you really do need something like Split Second to really pull this off, to stop the combo once you've got the engine running. Another card in the deck that is incredibly powerful in any token-based strategy that uses white is Cathar's Crusade. So Cathar's Crusade is a 5-mana enchantment, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Now, Cathar's Crusade with just Marath is already kind of ridiculous, because you can pay 1, remove a counter from Marath to make an elemental. Cathar's Crusade triggers, the elemental token that you just made and Marath get counters. So then you just pay another 1 to remove another counter from Marath, make another elemental, Cathar's Crusade triggers again. So that token you just made plus the token before and Marath get counters, and you just keep going. So with Marath and Cathar's Crusade, it's kind of like a 2-card combo. Yes, it is limited by how much mana you have, but you can make enormous creatures without ever diminishing the original starting number of counters on Marath. Cathar's Crusade and Cryptic Trilobite in Marath, they work together in this way to where Cathar's Crusade replaces the counters on Marath, puts extra counters on Cryptic Trilobite, so you can make an absolutely massive board that is really kind of impossible to overcome. Another combo in the deck is Heliod's Suncrowned and Walking Ballista. So this is, or was for a time, I don't think it is right now at the time of me making this video, one of the top tier combos in Modern. It was for a little bit. But basically, Heliod's Suncrowned is a 3-mana god. It's got indestructible, can only be a creature as long as you have 5 or more devotion. We're not really interested in ever turning Heliod into a creature. I don't even know if there's enough white mana symbols in the deck. Like, you'd have to try really hard to turn it into a creature, but we're not interested in that. We're interested in its 3rd and 4th abilities. So whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature or enchantment you control, and you can pay 1 and a white. Another target creature gains lifelink until end of turn. So with just Marath and Heliod, you could give Marath lifelink by paying 1 and a white, and then start pinging things, which means that you could remove a counter from Marath, deal a damage somewhere. Because Marath has lifelink, you get the counter back. But this works really well with Walking Ballista. So Walking Ballista is XX artifact creature, and it comes to play with X counters. You can pay 4 to put a counter on it, which sometimes you do, sometimes it comes up. But the really important ability is remove a +1/+1 counter from Walking Ballista, and it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. So it costs nothing to remove the counter from Walking Ballista. So if you have Heliod and Ballista in play, Heliod gives Walking Ballista lifelink, and then you can deal infinite damage. You can ping an entire board of creatures. You can go directly to players' faces. This is a 2-card infinite damage combo. And the great thing is, Walking Ballista in a deck that's got tons of +1/+1 counters is kind of great already on its own. It synergizes really well with the deck, but it is a 2-card win-con combo when paired with Heliod. Both of these decks are great, just in the deck, but if you can manage to put these two together and have enough mana to, give it lifelink, give the Ballista lifelink, and then start pinging, you will just win, unless like a player has Shroud or Hexproof. Then you've got to kind of work around that, find a way to get through their defenses. There's a lot of synergy in this deck. So I've just showed you combos that are basically game ending. Synergies are just cards that work really, really well together. I would argue that all combos are just synergies that push the power level to the extreme, to where you can pretty much just end the game. Great synergistic cards in this deck. One of them is Basilisk Collar. So Basilisk Collar is an equipment. If you can get it onto Marath, Marath will gain Death Touch and Lifelink. Now, Death Touch says that whenever a creature with Death Touch deals damage, it's enough damage to kill whatever creature was being dealt the damage. So that turns Marath's ping ability into a pay 1, remove a counter, kill a creature, which is kind of amazing. And of course, Basilisk Collar works really well with Walking Ballista as well. Seedborn Muse lets you untap all permanents during each other player's untap step. So with Marath, you want to have mana open to use its ability, and that just basically lets you do it during other players' turns. So the combination of Seedborn Muse and Marath is great, but there's also Instants, and even just Walking Ballista's pay 4, put a counter on it, is handy with Seedborn Muse if you're just trying to crank up your board during other players' turns. So it feels like you're taking extra turns during other people's turns, which is, incredibly strong. It's a very powerful synergy. This deck doesn't necessarily need combos to win. If your combo is disrupted, or you just don't find your pieces, or don't find the tutors to find your pieces, you can just go with a nice old-fashioned, put a lot of tokens on the board and drop a big bomb that works well with those tokens. If you're in green-white and want to play tokens, you kind of have to play these cards. These are the famous token doublers. So they both do pretty much the exact same thing. They do literally the exact same thing. If you would put a token into play, instead you make 2. Which with just one of these in Marath, you pay 1, remove a counter from Marath, make an elemental, but because you have these in play, you make 2. Which is a lot of value to happen really quickly. And as you'll see, this deck is rife with token creation. So it's very easy to make an incredible board of tokens, just to go very, very wide, very quickly. And the payoff to playing, token doublers are these bad boys. So Avenger of Zendikar is a 7 mana 5/5 with landfall. It just makes plant tokens equal to the number of lands, which can just swing the game. If you have something like Cathar's Crusade and Avenger of Zendikar, you're golden. But the two big creatures that really do end the game are Craterhoof Behemoth and Elish Norn. So Elish Norn is a 7 mana Praetor. It's a 4/7 with Vigilance. Other creatures you control get +2/+2, which is a pretty big bump. It's not nearly as big as some things, but also giving your creatures your opponents control -2/-2 really can just be game breaking. It can decimate someone's board while pumping yours, getting blockers out of the way, and then you push through with your army of tokens. And then Craterhoof Behemoth, which sees play in Legacy, pretty much any token deck that's in green. 8 mana 5/5 Haster. So when it enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. A very popular combination of cards is like Avenger of Zendikar and Craterhoof Behemoth coming into play together with something like Tooth and Nail. Even though the Avenger and the tokens don't have haste, if you already have a few creatures in play, the Craterhoof Behemoth is massive and can attack that turn, and it pumps everything in play, and it has haste, so it can just swing. So a lot of times, Craterhoof Behemoth on an even decent board, like maybe 4 or 5 creatures, should be enough to kill one player. In a 4-player game, Craterhoof Behemoth, if you have a fairly respectable board, can even just kill multiple players all at once. So these are the top end of the deck that can just win the game, even if you don't combo. Champion of Lambholt, there in the middle, is a 3 mana 1/1 human warrior. Creatures with power less than Champion of Lambholt's power can't block creatures you control, and whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Champion of Lambholt. Now, you're going to be putting a lot of creatures into play with this deck. Champion of Lambholt's power is just going to keep going up, it's going to get bigger, especially with all the effects that put extra counters on, essentially making your creatures unblockable, and also turning into a massive threat on its own. And then there are 2 instants, March the Multitudes and Secure the Waste, that just put X tokens into play. So March the Multitudes, it's, I think, a lot less good than Secure the Wastes. But it does have Convoke. So it's X, green, white, white, and Convoke is an ability that you can tap creatures that you have in play to help pay for its X. So if you have 5 creatures in play, you can tap them, plus whatever mana you were going to spend anyway, to make that X really huge. And you make X 1/1 white soldier creature tokens with lifelink. Now the lifelink can actually be kind of helpful. And Secure the Waste is just X white instant, put X 1/1 white warrior creature tokens into play. These with things like Cathar's Crusade, for example, or a token doubler, can really just make your board get out of hand and be really hard to deal with. This deck, being probably one of my top tier decks, has a lot of tutors. Some play groups don't really like tutors. I personally try not to run that many tutors in my other decks. I actually, in my black decks, I don't even run Demonic Tutor because I find that it ruins the variance of games, and that's one of the great appeals of EDH, is that you sit down, you play a game with the deck, you play 10 games in a row, and pretty much all 10 games are going to be different. However, with this deck, as this is my big gun that I like to bring out at really competitive tables, there are a lot of tutors in this deck to make it more consistent, to help you hit your combos, and when you're playing at more powerful tables, you're kind of anticipating your opponents are also going to be playing tutors. So it only seems fair that if this is my go hard, go strong deck, that I should be playing the things that make my deck, optimal. The 4 tutors I play that put creatures directly into play are Finale of Devastation, Green Sun Zenith, or Zenith, Court of Calling, and Tooth of Nail. So Tooth of Nail I mentioned earlier. It's 7 mana. Search your library for, you can choose one. Search your library for up to 2 creatures, reveal them, put them into your hand, shuffle your library, or put up to 2 creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield, but you can entwine it. So basically you're almost always casting the spell for 9, going for, I don't know, Avenger and Craterhoof Behemoth, or Elish Norn and Craterhoof, or whatever combination of cards. Finale of Devastation up there in the top left. X green, search your library and or graveyard, which can be really helpful if someone's killed a combo piece or someone has been milling you. And you put it into play, and if X is 10 or more, creatures you control get +X and gain haste until end of turn, which, which in this deck, getting to 12 mana in total isn't impossible. You'll see if you look at the deck list, there's a lot of really powerful ramp in this deck, where Finale of Devastation for, X10 is probably going to win you the game as well. Court of Calling down there in the bottom left, X triple green is an instant. It also has that ability Convoke, so you can turn your tokens that you've made maybe earlier on to help you cast this, and you get to search for a creature with converted mana cost X or less and put it into play. Green Sun's Zenith is the weakest of these four. It's just X and green. It's a sorcery, and you search your library for a green creature card with converted mana cost X or less and put it onto the battlefield, and then it shuffles back into your library. That shuffles back into your library. It doesn't come up too often, but if someone's playing like maybe a mill strategy or you run through your entire deck, you can just keep casting it for 0 and just make sure you don't deck yourself. Being limited to just green creatures isn't great. I mean, you can't go get Elish Norn, but you'll see that most of the creatures in this deck are green. Even just being able to go get a Conclave Mentor, or if you're really stuck, like a Sakura Tribe Elder. I know in Legacy they play this with Dryad Arbor, to where you just play green X0 and go get that land. I took that land out of this deck because I found that you really need lands that produce mana the turn they come in. There's only 2 exceptions in this deck, which you'll see later, that come into play, and you can't use them that turn right away, which I found to be really important when you're trying to constantly create a threatening board or respond to someone else's, or just close out the game. So that's why Dryad Arbor is not in here. There's also tutors that put creatures directly into your hand, or Worldly Tutor that puts on top. So Worldly Tutor, 1 green, search your library for a creature, reveal that card and shuffle your library and put it on top. Just technically it's card disadvantage, but be able to get any creature from your deck on top of your library. Normally you do this in your upkeep, so you draw it that turn. Very strong. Shared Summons there on the bottom left. 5 mana instant, search your library for up to 2 creature cards with different names, reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle your library. I mean, you can just go for Heliod and Walking Ballista, like right there, or whatever other cards you need. Eladamri's Call, 1 green and white, just search for a creature, put it into your hand as an instant as well. And then there's Recruiter of the Guard, 2 and a white for a 1/1 human soldier, and when it enters the battlefield, you can search your library for a creature with toughness 2 or less, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Now, Ballista, 0 power toughness. Conclave Mentor, it's a 2/2. So Recruiter of the Guard can get you some of the key cards in your deck. Now there is Imperial Recruiter, which is 2 and a red. You'll see it later on when I show cards that could be in this deck. It's better. It would actually be better in this deck. You could get it. You could hypothetically get like Seedborn Muse, which I'll mention in a minute. I just don't own Imperial Recruiter, and I haven't actually found anyone that is willing to trade or sell one, but it's something I will get down the road and add in this deck, probably in the place of Recruiter of the Guard, or I might run both. Now, X. There are a lot of cards in this deck with X in their mana cost, and Marath has X in its activation cost. So this is where we see Unbound Flourishing being more than just a combo piece, just adding up the counters that go on to Marath. All of these cards with X in them benefit by having Unbound Flourishing in play. So March of the Multitudes, you do it for X. Because it's an instant spell with X, you get to double it. Or Court of Calling, you get to search for 2 creatures. Or Green Sun Zenith, you get to search for 2 creatures. Down there at the bottom, in the middle, you'll see Martial Coup. Now, Martial Coup is one of the removal spells, one of the board wipes in this deck. And if you set it for 5 or more, you're going to destroy everything. You don't really want to copy that, because the first one, the copy will resolve, kill everything, you make 5 tokens. Then the original will resolve, you'll kill everything and make 5 tokens. But if you're in a situation where you just want the creatures, you set it for 4 or less, and you'll get to double it with Unbound Flourishing and keep all of those soldiers. Now, in order for a deck like this to work, you need a lot of mana. This is a very mana-hungry deck, and if you can ramp hard enough and fast enough, and just draw some of the tutors or key cards, you're going to be in a very position to win. Ramp is one of the two key pillars of Commander, the other one being Draw, which we'll talk about in a minute. And you got to give a little shout out to the original ramp, Rampant Growth, which unfortunately is not in this deck because Power Creep has left a card like that in the dust. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the ramp in this deck. If you're interested, you can look at the deck list. But these are 5 that I think really stand out and go very well with the deck. So at the top, you've got Garruk Wildspeaker, which is a 4 mana, 2 double green, comes in with 3 loyalty. You plus it to untap 2 lands, minus it to make a 3/3 beast token, or you -4 to give your team +3/+3 and trample to end of turn. Basically an overrun. Now, it's not amazing at all 3 points, but the fact it brings all 3 together is quite wonderful. It serves multiple purposes, and the fact that you can ultimate it the next turn after it's played is quite rare with Planeswalkers. Normally you need a couple turns to build them up to get their loyalty high enough so you can ultimate them. One thing, card in the middle, Mirari's Wake. 5 mana enchantment, 3 green and white. Creatures you control get +1/+1. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana of any type that land produced. Now, that oh my god. Okay, that with Garruk in play, your land's double tap now, so being able to untap double tapping lands is incredible. And also being able to give your whole team, +1/+1 is very strong with any kind of go wide strategy. Up there in the top right hand corner, you have Earthcraft. 1 and a green for an enchantment, and you can tap an untapped creature you control to untap target basic land. So that target basic land means that you're going to be purposefully going to get basic lands into play just so you have Earthcraft online if you do draw it. This means that all those random tokens you made that don't really have any abilities, they suddenly turn into mana dorks that give you mana. Also, with Marath in play, let's say someone goes to kill Marath, you tap Marath, you tap Marath to untap a basic, tap that basic to make mana, remove a counter from Marath to make a token, tap that token, untap that land, make that mana, remove another counter from Marath, and to make another token. So you can empty Marath of all of its counters, making as many tokens as you had counters on Marath, put them into play, which is really, really powerful. Like I said earlier, sometimes you want to get all the counters off Marath so it dies, goes to the command zone so you can replay it, so it comes into play with even more counters. Earthcraft makes that totally possible, which is really, really strong. In the bottom left, you've got Incubation Druid, which, it's early game, 2 mana for a 0/2. Tap, add 1 mana of any color that a land you control could produce. If Incubation Druid has a +1/+1 counter on it, add 3 mana of that type instead. So Marath, you can pay 1, put a counter on it, and now it just taps for 3, which is very, very, very strong. And over there in the bottom right, there's Xenagos the Reveler. Now, this card is a little bit like Garruk. It's more of a token synergy one, to where it's +1. So it's 4 mana, 2 red and green for a 3 loyalty planeswalker. +1 is add X mana in any combination of red and or green to your mana pool, where X is the number of creatures you control. So early on, not amazing if you only have like 1 or 2 or 0 creatures. But if you play it later on when you have maybe 4 or 5, it's a huge boost in mana. Its 0 ability, put a 2/2 red and green satyr creature token with haste onto the battlefield, is actually quite good if you're trying to build up your tokens. Having haste means you can pressure other players' planeswalkers, or if you have a token doubler, making 2/2 hasters for 0 is very strong. And we saw Doubling Season earlier on, to where Xenagos is -6. Exile the top 7 cards of your library. You may put any number of creature or land cards from among them onto the battlefield. I won a game there a couple weeks ago where I had Doubling Season in play, played Xenagos, ultimated him immediately, and worldly tutored with the ultimate ability on the stack, went and got Elish Norn. So Xenagos was able to put Elish Norn and the other cards that were revealed into play right away, which was very, very, very strong. My opponent just scooped. Sorry, Joey. Like I said, draw is another key part of any good EDH deck. Fortunately, green is in the colors of ramp and has surprisingly good draw. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the draw in the deck. Now, there are a lot of draw cards in green, and draw is one of the most important aspects of EDH. These are the four that I want to take the time to actually talk about that I think are very, very synergistic and very powerful in the deck. Welcoming Vampire and Mentor the Meek do very similar things. They both draw you cards when a creature with power 2 or less comes into play, which, Marath can make 1/1 elementals, which is ideal. So the difference between them is Welcoming Vampire is a 3-mana 2/3 flyer, and whenever one or more other creatures with power 2 or less enter the battlefield under your control, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. So if you make 2 or more creatures in a turn, you're only going to get a single draw. But with Marath, you can make tokens at instant speed, and you can make them one at a time. So you can stagger your token creation during other players' turns to net a card each turn, on each other player's turn and on your own, which is really good. And it's free. You don't have to pay extra to draw those cards. Mentor the Meek, whenever a creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under control, you may pay 1 if you do draw a card. So if you make 3 tokens in a turn, with power 2 or less, you could pay 3 and draw 3 cards. Sometimes that paying mana to draw cards can be a bit of a limitation. It can, cut back on the number of tokens you can make so you can draw the most cards, or you're not going to draw, the optimum number of cards. So, but both of these in the deck help you maintain card advantage and, keep the tank full. Skull Clamp, if you're not familiar with it, is a 1-mana equipment with 1 to equip. Equip creature gets +1/-1. Now, amazingly, that -1 was apparently thought to be a drawback when they printed this card. Never thinking that people would, put it on creatures with toughness 1, so they would die, or putting them on creatures and then sacrificing them. So whenever a creature dies, draw 2 cards. This is probably the most powerful draw spell in the deck. It's wonderful to search for. There's Enlightened Tutor in the deck to help you go and get it. I could even see an argument for running the 1-white sorcery that lets you search for an equipment. So you could go get Skull Clamp and Basilisk Collar, but only having 2 targets, it kind of pushed out of my idea of what was an optimal build. But yeah, Skull Clamp, incredibly powerful card, really should be in any token-based strategy or any strategy where you are sacrificing creatures. Return of the Wild Speaker has become a recent pet favorite card of mine. It's a 5-mana instant. Choose one. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control, or non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn. Like I mentioned, Marath gets bigger, so 3, 5, 7, 9. So this can end up drawing you 5, 7, 9 cards. But it's also the being able to give your team of non-human creatures +3/+3 is enormous. I think there's only 2 humans in the deck. And all of the things that make tokens in this deck make non-human creatures. They make warriors or soldiers or elementals. Not humans. So Return of the Wild Speaker, very powerful to where it can draw you cards or close out the game. I really do love it. And I love that it's so cheap. It's like 50-cent card. It's great. Any good commander deck should have a little bit of recursion. People will kill your stuff. People might mill you. Stuff will die. And it's important to be able to get some of your key cards back. Sun Titan and Eternal Witness. Sun Titan, 6-mana 6/6, Vigilance, Giant. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, you can return a permanent with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. This deck runs a lot of fetch lands. It runs a lot of utility creatures. So being able to get those things back, very, very powerful. And just 6-mana 6/6 Vigilance is great with things like Return of the Wild Speaker. Eternal Witness, 3-mana 2/1, Human Shaman. It's one of the 2 humans in the deck. When it enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand. Now, a particularly mean thing you can do if you don't think you're going to be able to kill the other 3 players all at once, you can Tooth and Nail for Eternal Witness and whatever creature you need, put it into play and immediately get the Tooth and Nail back to your hand. It's the same thing with Shared Summons. Have Eternal Witness be one of the 2 creatures you go for, play the Witness, get back the Tutor. Very, very strong cards. This deck has Marath, which obviously can interact with creatures and planeswalkers, but every good commander deck needs a certain amount of interaction. This one has maybe less interaction than a lot of players would prefer, but this deck is quite focused on trying to build a big board and just close the game, but there is some interaction in it. So Swords to Plowshares, if you've been playing Commander for any decent stretch of time, 1 white, exile target creature, is controller gains life equal to its power. Normally the life gain is irrelevant. It's so efficient. Pretty much every single white deck should run this card. Aura Shards, 3 mana, 1 green white, enchantment. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment. Now this with Marath, just that on its own, means you can make tokens to kill stuff. If you make many tokens in a turn, you can wipe an entire opponent's entire board of artifacts and enchantments. Incredibly strong card. Heroic Intervention I count as interaction because it interacts with your opponent's kill spells. It's as close to a counter spell as we have a green, but it's also great with board wipes. So if someone goes to destroy all creatures or destroy all non-land permanents, Heroic Intervention saves your board, or you can do it with your own board wipes to where you want to wipe the board and you can Heroic Intervention, make yourself indestructible, all your board wipes turn into one-sided. Yeah, devastating. Knight of Autumn is just in there as utility, so 3 mana, 2/1, comes into play, put 2 counters on it, you can destroy an artifact or enchantment, or you can gain 4 life. You're pretty much always using it for that second ability, and because it's green, it's tutorable. Sometimes certain permanents have to die, and it's just a good catch-all. I mentioned board wipe, so left there you've got Austere Command. One of the reasons to play white in EDH, in my opinion. 6 mana, you can destroy all artifacts or all enchantments. You have to choose 2, or you can destroy all creatures with converted mana cost 3 or less, or destroy all creatures with converted mana cost 4 or greater. I think it's mana value now. Sorry, I'm stuck in my ways. So in this situation, like Marath only has, 4 creatures in the deck with mana value 4 or greater. So you can destroy everything with 4 or greater and destroy enchantments if your opponents have more enchantments than you, or artifacts. This against artifacts or enchantment decks can be particularly devastating. Wrath of God I have in the deck, probably just because of nostalgia. It's like the OG. But also being able to destroy all creatures, they can't be regenerated. A lot of people play board wipes that they can't deal with regeneration, and a good creature with regeneration can really create a problem. So having, when you want to board wipe, 4 mana, destroy everything, totally disregarding regeneration, it's it's excellent value. And even though it could probably be something that makes tokens or more synergistic, I like having just a solid Wrath of God. You know what you're going to do, clear the board, no exceptions. Martial Coup I talked about earlier for its interaction with that enchantment that doubles X abilities and X spells. This one, pay X double white, create X 1/1 white soldier creature tokens. If X is 5 or more, destroy all other creatures. Being able to pay 7 or more, wipe the board, and have tokens in play, very strong. Like this with Cathar's Crusade means you get to wipe the board and then make incredibly big soldiers that you'll probably win on your next turn. There are a number of different cards that could easily be in this deck. Maybe you want to include them in yours. Let's take a look at them. So Imperial Recruiter, I mentioned earlier, probably should be in this deck. When I get my hands on one, I will slot it in. It's just another tutor, lets you search. When it comes into play, you can search your library for a creature with power 2 or less, reveal it, put it into your hand. So this could get Seedborn Muse, where the white one that I'm running couldn't. Decimate is an excellent EDH card. 4 mana, destroy target artifact, target creature, target enchantment, and target land. Yes, you do have to have 4 targets, but in a multiplayer game, it's not a problem. However, this is not in my deck because it goes against the house rules that we have, especially when you're playing one-on-one. I know these are multiplayer decks, but they're also fun to play 1v1 if you're not being incredibly competitive. And we've decided that Decimate is just not a fun card. And so it's not in my build. It should probably be in yours if you are playing pretty cutthroat multiplayer games. Beast Within, or also Chaos Warp, just 3-mana interaction, goes after a permanent. This one destroys and they get a token. Chaos Warp shuffles it in. But yeah, it's just a piece of interaction. There's an argument for it to be in this deck. Just this particular iteration doesn't run it, but it is very strong. Bow of Nylea was in this deck for a very long time. A 3-mana legendary enchantment artifact. Attacking creatures you control have Death Touch. So just another way to give Marath Death Touch. So you attack with Marath, it gets Death Touch. You can remove counters to ping their creatures to immediately kill them. I found that Marath is more of an engine. I almost never really want to attack with it now. I don't want to open it up to being blocked or things that interact with attacking creatures. So I did cut it. I was never really too happy to draw it. And having Basilisk Collar is a bit of redundancy there. Its other abilities: pay 1 and a green, tap it, put a counter on a creature, or deal 2 damage to a creature with flying, or gain 3 life, or shuffle cards from your graveyard into your library, are all useful abilities. And maybe when you build this deck, you'll want to put Bow of Nylea in. I feel like I have to mention it because it was in this deck for a very long time and only got cut recently, but it's just a card that I really liked in it for a very long time. I feel like it was worth mentioning. 3 visits. If you're looking at my ramp package, I run Nature's Lore. I just don't have a 3 visits. It also should be in this deck. I just don't happen to have one yet. It's a great card. 1 and a green. Search your library for a forest. Put that card on the battlefield and shuffle your library. You can go for a duel. It comes into play untapped. It helps trigger your landfall things. A very, very strong card. Which, talking of landfall, Tireless Provisioner. 2 and a green. For a 3/2 landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a food token or a treasure token. This also probably should be in this deck. Be interested to hear on your advice or your input about what should be cut, what should be changed, because there absolutely is a place in this deck for Tireless Provisioner, particularly with the token doublers, where instead of making 1 treasure when you hit landfall, you make 2. So Tireless Provisioner maybe should be in the deck instead of March of the Multitude. Or I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. This deck is very color hungry and cares about its lands coming to play untapped and basically always having access to the 3 colors. But I do have 4 utility lands. There are the Hideaway lands, Mosswort Bridge, Hideaway. So Hideaway is when this land enters the battlefield. You look at the top 4 cards of your library, exile 1 of them face down, put the rest on bottom of the library in a random order. Actually, no, just on the bottom of your library. Taps for green, and the 2 Hideaway lands do the same thing for Hideaway, but you get to activate them differently. So for Mosswort Bridge, you pay a green, tap it, and you get to play the exile card. I think it's actually cast now, without paying its mana cost if you can have power 10 or greater, which is very easy to do if you have lots of tokens, and Marath is enormous. Windbrisk Heights is pay 1 white and tap it, but you have to have attacked with 3 or more creatures on that turn, which is easy when you're going wide with tokens. Gavony Township, probably the weakest of the 4 on this page. Taps for colorless, but you can pay 2 green and white, tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Very good if you have a lot of tokens in play or you have something that puts additional counters on. And then Scavenger Grounds is just in there as graveyard hate. So it's a desert. Taps for colorless, pay 2, tap and sacrifice a desert so it can sacrifice itself to exile all cards from all graveyards. Doesn't target. It's just excellent at being able to really punish graveyard-centric decks that are trying to use the graveyard in very unfair ways. Now, there are a lot of interesting different takes on this deck. I've gone with the +1/+1 counter token combo kind of route. I found this on Reddit by The Monkey, where it focuses more on Marath being able to ping your own creatures with the different cycle of dinosaurs with Enrage, which I think is a very cool take. Definitely probably more of a less cutthroat build. It's probably a good way of putting it. But my way of building this deck is definitely not the only one. There are different versions out there, and honestly, I really liked this Enrage one. Unfortunately, Marath is now designated as one of my go-to hyper-powerful decks, and just the ping strategy didn't really seem to mesh with that, but it's something you might want to try. I am very interested in hearing your feedback. This is the first one of these videos I've made. It will probably, hopefully, be part of a series. I'm interested in your ideas on my deck building, my card choices, or even the video itself. So input is welcome, and thank you for watching.